Good evening and welcome to Science Pub. My name is Stephanie Coleman and I am the Community Education Manager at the Santa Barbara Museum of Natural History and Sea Center. And I want to welcome you to your October Science Pub. We are so happy to have you all here and joining us on this beautiful fall evening. We first and foremost want to thank Hub International. They have sponsored the last 3 science pubs of 2020. So some of you may have been able to register last minute, and that is due to Hub International. So thank you so much for sponsoring this free public program. We also want to thank Dargan's, and although that we are virtual, we hope that you are still supporting local businesses like Dargan's and the Museum of Natural History and Sea Center and any of your other local favorites. We all need that help. We need to come together as a community and support local. So thank you for continuing to do that. So tonight we have Dr. Diana Arya from UC Santa Barbara, and I'm really looking forward to this presentation. We got to do a little rehearsal a couple of days ago, and I have to tell you, this is one of my all-time favorite science pubs. Not just because it's about reading and science, which are some of my favorite things, but I think you'll see that it is very appropriate for timing. So without further ado, let me go ahead and introduce you to our wonderful speaker tonight. So Dr. Diana Arya is an associate professor in education at UC Santa Barbara. She uses the pronouns she or they. She is a faculty director of the McEnroe Reading and Language Arts Clinic, housed in the UCSB Gevirtz Graduate School of Education. Her research interests are at the intersection of language and literacy and culture, with a particular focus on students across the K through 20 spectrum, with development in critical reading skills needed for engaging in 21st century learning contexts. They lead a multiple program initiative called the Community Based Literacies, which we'll talk more about in her presentation, before pursuing her Ph.D. at UC Berkeley. She was a classroom teacher and reading specialist in various urban contexts. They have more than 20 years of teaching experiences and has taught both K through 12 populations, in pre-service, in-service, and university students. So without further ado, hopefully her reading is better than my reading. So Dr. Diana Arya, please take it away.
Thank you so much. And thank you for inviting me to be here and to share little things that I've learned along my life so far. The focus of my talk, I've tried to encompass as much in my title, The Science of Reading and the Reading of Science, Supports, Critiques, and Questions. Supports we've known for a while, but there's lots of critiquing happening these days, and also questions about some of the supports we thought were supportive. So I'm going to share as much as I can about what we're learning about the field in the area called the science of reading. And I like to focus on the reading of science. And in fact, the picture that you're seeing here, those are children that come to the McEnroe Reading and Language Arts Clinic that you heard earlier. And we would have a summer camp. And we didn't get a chance to do that camp in person. Instead, we engaged in online activities, and we're still running, and there are still ways that we support our community. But I really miss my young colleagues here. I learned so much every time I connect with them. So moving on, before we start with anything, given that it's it's Indigenous Peoples Day, I want to also acknowledge the fact that I'm sitting here on Chumash land. I want to acknowledge the Chumash people, who are the traditional custodians of this land. We also like to, I also like to pay respect to elders, both past and present, as well as other Indigenous people present. We are all proud to continue the tradition of coming together, their tradition of coming together and growing as a community. So I can't think of a more appropriate thing to do, but to acknowledge that important tradition and current practice. So let's talk about the science of reading. What is that? I think that many of you might have heard about it in the news. It's been very popular in the media. What counts as the science of reading? And in fact, there is a special issue that came out recently in one of our top journals in literacy research. And it's called Reading Research Quarterly. And it's focused on, actually, I took the title of that special issue and used it as the title of my talk. And basically what this special issue says is that there's no single definition of what counts as the science of reading, and there's no really consensus about what should be included. And that was by the guest editors of that special issue. That doesn't mean that there's such strong disagreements, but I think the question and the critiquing is really on what's included, and that's an important thing to think about as I share. So thinking about the science of reading, if I were to step back, and so this is my take on the science of reading, I'm trying to be as inclusive and expansive as possible. It generally has to do with the study of the development and socioculturally layered practices related to the interactions between readers and various textual media. Now, that last term has changed. It usually meant what exactly you see this young man, this young individual doing. They're reading a book. And typically when we think of reading, we think of engagement in books. And obviously we're in the 21st century, and there are many reasons why that's a little bit of a narrow definition. And there are many changes happening in the assessment frameworks for our nation that will reflect a much more expansive view of what counts as text. But the kinds of studies that are generally captured with such a description include, the idea of how reading develops over time, which we know can be varied, and it has a direct impact on it's influenced by the kinds of languages we know, the communities that we live in, the cultural values. All of that plays a role in the ways in which we read. There's also a lot of focus on specific reading skill development. So like to understand the different sounds of the English language system, for example, and how that language, that sound system, the phonological awareness is connected to print. So there's studies there. There's also a lot of work on how one engages in reading strategies. So if you're not a digital native, I'm not a digital native, I use a lot of strategies to navigate my way through the internet world. And some are more able to navigate than others. But there are ways that we use context to help us unpack unfamiliar words. So even at a micro level, strategy use is something that is a part of us as readers. There's a lot of interest in understanding the ways in which we read across disciplinary contexts. I've been learning, and we have one study in particular that looks at the way a historian approaches a text as opposed to a physicist. And when they're looking at a published study, there are ways in which we read that has a particular disciplinary flavor. There's also work, and this is part of the work that I'm interested in as well, is text quality and difficulty. What makes a good text? What makes a text worth reading or possibly just sitting on, as we can see in this picture? Those are questions that researchers ask. And especially in more recent years, this idea of us being in a multilingual world, multiple languages are being recognized, and how that impacts and also augments the reading process and the reading development. And finally, the multimodal reading practices. What I hear on a podcast, what I read from a book, how do I compare what I learned from those two mediums? That, and how do I triangulate that? That's another part of the reading research world. And all of those, I would say, are related to the science of reading. So the focus of my talk, I mean, obviously I can't just, that's a big list that I shared, right? It was a huge list. We'd be here all night. Stephanie would have to ask Hub to sponsor more seats. I mean, it's not possible. So the focus, I'm going to focus on three major questions that I hope kind of touches base on all of, at least parts of what I shared. First, I'm going to talk about what are important skills involved in reading in the 21st century. So I'm going to be talking specifically about new reading standards that are coming down the pipeline, and what makes a considerate text for engaging developing readers. I'll move to that question. And then finally, how we can support the development of such reading skills. I really embrace the community nature of my work. And because of that, what do we do together to foster greater critical reading thinking skills? So let's talk about what it's like reading in the 21st century. I mean, yes, we still have books, and I have ordered a great deal of them. I have been doing a lot of reading over the summer, as maybe many of you have. I mean, being in a pandemic, getting my hands on a book, I just love it. And I've been reading a lot about anti-racism and other topics that are near and dear to my heart. And that's still a part of my life, and is part of many of our lives, as well as newspapers. And many of us read in different languages in these sort of hard copy ways. But we also know that the iPad is not only, pervasive through our community, but it's our lifeline. It's one of the reasons why we've been able to manage some of our educational sessions with schools through iPads that have been administered to each student within the Goleta and Santa Barbara districts. We also know that Twitter was not invented in the early 1900s. It actually was born very recently, and it created a whole language of discussion. And I have to tell you that as a professional, I need to learn how to engage with Twitter, and I occasionally do, and I hope to be more active in the future. But it's our way of communicating big ideas to large amounts of people. And so it's an important practice, both in everyday and in our professional lives. And then of course we have Yoda. No, that is a meme. So we have memes. We have pictures that convey whole messages. We have memes that are animated GIFs, that share a whole point of view. And that takes skill to learn how to engage, how to create, and how to read these memes. We also have data representations more than ever before. Back in the early 1900s, such data was encompassing just a simple amount of information. Now we have interactive data representations that are animated in order to to take care or to cover all of the information that one wants to convey with any new scientific findings. So even our data representations are becoming more multidimensional and multimodal. Podcasts are ever so increasingly important. And how many of us listen to podcasts as we're walking and running? Incredible content through that medium. And then there's also the blogosphere. there are many people engaging in online blogging and vlogging that communicates a great deal of information and a lot of learning opportunities. We have more journals that are now all electronically available. Some of them are only electronically available, and the number keeps ticking up, and they're becoming more open access. So with all that, we are amassed with information more than ever before. The 21st century is filled with so much information, and it is paramount that we become and also support the becoming of critical consumers of information. And so that's leading me to the new standards about all of this. So some of you may already know about the Common Core state standards that's been a part of California for a while now. For California, and this is what it states in the standards, is critical thinking, problem solving, and analytical skills are required for success in college, career, and in life. We have to think critically now. Students must learn to work together, express and listen carefully to ideas, evaluate, become more sensitive to inconsistencies, ambiguities, and poor reasoning in texts. So before, the text was the authority. That's where you got the knowledge. That's where you got the truth. One of the first kinds of books that people were reading were religious texts. And so they were supposed to offer the truth. And now it's not just the truth that's out there. And sometimes the truth is muddled with other things. We need to be more critical in our approaches to text. And on the national level, scholars are taking it very seriously. So I want to introduce you to a framework. So in 2025, there's going to be a brand new framework for the reading test that is administered on the national level. Now, not every student takes this test. It's a representative sample of our country that takes this test at the 4th, 8th, and 12th grades. So it's often referred to as our nation's report card, and it focuses on literacy and in math. And it's funded by the US Department of Education, and scholars are leading the formation of this new assessment. And it's the reason why we have a lot of this conversation about the science of reading. It's all coming to a head because of what we never quite resolved, which is what has been often characterized as the reading wars. And this was a debate, a tension that emerged in the 1980s when whole language came about, that whole language practices in engaging in texts were important, and not just focusing on discrete skills in reading. And most colleagues that I know that are in literacy see this either or debate as not very useful or helpful, because we need to take a more comprehensive view to reading and how we develop in reading. And the National Assessment of Educational Progress, the reading framework for this, the NAEP, is now texts need to be multimodal and include data representations. That will be likely on the assessment. Reading tasks will have an authentic purpose. There will be a reason to read, not just read this passage and underline the main idea or select the main idea. You don't know why you read that passage other than someone testing your reading comprehension. There will need to be a real purpose for reading that text or multiple texts. Collaborative reading discussions are going to be assessed. How does one engage in talking about text with other children? So this is not going to be fully individualized. I'm not sure exactly how the test will look like. Again, this is the framework about what's important. Science and social studies are now key disciplines embedded in those assessment tasks. I want to add a little bit of a critique. I wouldn't call science a discipline per se. There are many disciplines in science, but this is a good direction from which to go into. So critical thinking used to be a component of this assessment. Now it's going to be going through the entire assessment. So the ability to critically analyze what's missing, what's not quite right here. How does this text compare to this? How do I triangulate? And what kind of sense am I making out of it all? Those are the kinds of questions that are going to be posed. So authentic purposes, let me give you an example of what I mean about an authentic purpose for reading. So let's say the purpose for a given classroom would be for a student to write an essay about the impact of climate change on kelp forests for a book publication. So this essay will be embedded in a book publication for the public audience, for public readers. So these are young authors in the making. So that is an authentic purpose. And so perhaps this student will read an adapted text. I love to adapt primary sources from local news articles for children, so they get more current events that are similar to what the community sees and is exposed to. Perhaps they'll watch a little video and seeing the behavior of sea kelp. Maybe they'll learn a little bit about sea kelp. It's not a plant. I learned that it was not a plant, and I learned it because of this program. It's a protist. Maybe they'll listen to an NPR podcast about the well-being of our kelp forests, and maybe they'll look at a couple of data representations. All of these relate to a single topic that together help inform our young author into creating this essay on sea kelp by Daniela Espinosa Aguilera. I want to give her a shout out. She published this essay in the anthology that was produced from Harding Elementary School, which is one of our partnership schools here at the Gevirtz Graduate School of Education. We're very proud of this project. We have supported this, and we're in our second year of this project. But here's a good example of multimodal reading, of triangulating, of thinking about critically about the health and well-being of sea kelp, about the dangers of storms affecting the health of sea kelp, and also our contributions, the ways in which human activities affect that. So this is a good example of what I mean. How it'll look like in the assessment, that's years down the road. But the good thing is that we're seeing the need to show students why we read. You did a lot of reading to come to this event. You had to be able to navigate. You had to weigh the pros and cons. Maybe there were other invitations you read. You had to know where to click and where to upload. I mean, I'm just, upload your information. There's a lot of reading that went into you being here with me tonight. And so it's showing that and being transparent about that, and that you did not know how to do that many moons ago because we didn't have Zoom then. Zoom is a recent invention. In fact, there will be constant, and in fact, I think it'll be even more ramped up pacing of new literacies that will come into our society, and we will use them to communicate, to share, to grow, and to become who we want to be in this world. So my next question is that I'm going to focus on what makes a considerate text. I like the word considerate because oftentimes, and if you remember, Mr. Rogers, Fred Rogers of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, if you have a chance, please consider watching the documentary, Won't You Be My Neighbor? It's beautiful. He often notes that as adults, we forget what it's like to be a child. Just remember all the beautiful books that were available and how you felt in the classroom reading a textbook. I'm not quite sure. There might be some people who love textbooks. And if you do, I take, no offense, but they're not fun to read. And it often positions the child in a way that they have to somehow navigate and get the right answer. And that feeling of, that's not usually what we read for. We read to enjoy, to explore, to learn, to be inspired. And so to conjure up those feelings, I think that's what makes a text considerate, that it's considerate of the human being that's engaged in that text. So first and foremost, think about choice. What choice does the child have when reading a book or any kind of piece of text? When do they have choice? And what kind of variety is there in the choice that they get to make? And what kind of exploration is possible? So those are the three kind of qualities I think about when I think about a considerate text. Now I wanted to bring you into a classroom. This is a very typical classroom, and these bins are bins that might look, like they're somehow graded, right? There's A through P. So you're thinking A through P, what does that mean? They, generally speaking, classroom sets of books are usually structured in a way that associates with reading ability. And the philosophy behind this is you don't want a child to be too frustrated that they need to read within their particular level of readability. And that the more that they're able to read in their level, the more they'll enjoy reading and the more they'll develop the reading skills. So it has a lot of good intentions. And oftentimes they're color coded. So, this is just one example and it's color coded according to what's called the Lexile level. And this is associated with readability statistics, much of which was established in the 1940s. And it hasn't really changed much since. And I'll talk more about that. But typically, this is what the setup looks like. And so the child, I remember walking into a classroom, and usually I immediately connect with the young students there, my young colleagues, and I say, let's read together. And I recall one child said, well, I have to only read from the orange, I can only read an orange book. I'm like, an orange book. And he was talking about the circle, that was the only kind of book that he read. And what's unfortunate about that is then it stops the conversation of, what do you want to read about? What are you interested in? What excites you? Those are authentic questions about reading. Reading from the orange category is not authentic. So that's a change I am encouraging us to think about for our young colleagues. So let me tell you more about this Lexile level. Why does it exist, and isn't it helpful? Well, the way the text difficulty works is that it's a formula, it's an algorithm, and it was established in the 1940s. And it was based on several hundred books that are read by adults. So there were adult books that were used to establish this algorithm. And it's basically two variables, essentially, this readability statistic. It takes the average word frequency. And what word frequency means is how frequently is a particular word used in a text. So the word the, T-H-E, that's used everywhere in all the texts, right? It's hard to read a text that doesn't have the in it, right? So that has a very high frequency. And then we have lower frequencies. And a good example of a lower frequency word would be like bioluminescence. because you're obviously not going to read that unless you're learning about bioluminescence. So that would have a low frequency or a low quotient. And so they use that frequency, and they have each of these words has a particular quotient attached to it. And then the formula also takes into consideration average sentence length. So the idea is the longer the sentence is, likely the harder it is for the reader to figure out what's going on in the sentence. Maybe there's too many embedded clauses, for example, and the relationships are all wonky. So shorter sentences would be simpler and thus easier. And that is essentially the readability statistic. And we're going to try it out and see how good it is, okay? So I want, this is a little activity for you. I'm going to give you two texts, and I want you to decide which one is more difficult. And Stephanie, I think you were going to post oh, there it is. Okay, so there's a poll for you. And the first text is, Andy had to go to the store. He needed milk. 2 sentences. Andy, that's my partner, by the way, had to go to the store. He needed milk. And then we have number 2. Andy had to go to the store because he needed milk. So you decide, based on what I've said so far, which do you think is more difficult for a young reader? And let's just say maybe a second grader reading this text. A second grader reading this text, which one do you think is more difficult, or do you think they're equally difficult? And there's no correct answer. There's no correct answer to this, in the sense that, which I'll explain later. So whatever you think, just give it a guess.
All right, we have about 2/3 of their attendants have answered. So would you like me to end the poll?
Sure, go ahead. And what was the results? Okay, more people. Oh, some people think, okay, so there's some people equal. Almost the same number is sort of split between number 1 and equal. And then most people selected number 2. So you agreed with the readability statistic, because if we were working with the readability statistics, they will likely state that. So here is the readability statistic for the number 1. 0.5, that means someone between kindergarten and first grade. That's between kindergarten and first grade level. And for the second example, 3rd grade, 8th month. So you would have to be almost in 4th grade for this to be at this level of a reader, according to the readability statistics. But I want to share some things about this. So, and I guess the first thing I would state is that I did a study in 2011 with some colleagues, and we took 16 experimental texts and we administered them to 2nd and 3rd graders, I believe. And we had the experimental text changed. They had different conditions. So one condition had a lot of long sentences, embedded clauses. Some had a lot of like technical words, more complex vocabulary. Some have more simple vocabulary. They were adjusted in different ways. And what we found is absolutely no evidence that sentence length contributes to textual difficulty. It just didn't pan out. Furthermore, there is a study, and this was at a global level. Now, this is more of a psychometric study, so it's based on the analysis by Kathleen Chian. She found some issues in the readability metrics that they're just not empirically supported or publicly justified. So why did I not find that same behavior according to what the readability statistics would have predicted? Well, here's the thing. There's this thing called the simple view of reading. This is a model of reading that was created in the 70s by Goff and Tumner. And it's essentially was supposed to be sort of a nice, sort of succinct theory of what encompasses reading comprehension, which is decoding plus listening comprehension. So the idea is that one's listening comprehension skills and one's decoding skills often predict one's ability to comprehend text. And this has been kind of circulating lately, which was kind of surprising in that we have far more complex models out there now. The construction integration model is one by Quench that's very good. But the one thing the creators did not mean is to say that, yeah, reading's simple. It's just decoding and listening comprehension. That's it. No, there's nothing simple about decoding and listening comprehension. They're very, very complex practices. But it was a way of encompassing, was a way of seeing reading. And the fact that listening comprehension is such a big part of reading. Just think about your a child. When is the first, for those of you who are parents or those of you who work with very small children, they know what the word because is. They know that word. In fact, it's in their narrative structures. And the reason why is from the crib, right after birth, children are working on their narrative selves. That the normally functioning child is always working on crafting their stories. The babbling or the monologues that you hear at nighttime, if you ever hear your young child kind of talking a little bit at night, that's they're practicing narrative. And because is one of the first words they know, because they know it's an important part of the narrative. And here's a good example. Maybe you come, a child comes to their mom's upset because the younger sibling is not being included in a game, and the child said, well, it's because she's too young. I mean, because just comes out of the mouth. They know that word. So thinking about those two kinds of texts, a second grader could pretty much understand both, which is probably why we did not find any strong correlations with any particular condition associated with sentence length. And also, what's a critique and question to this is coming back to our memes. We are growing much more visual in our and graphical in our ways of communicating with all of the data representations that are happening. It's very clear that this formula needs to be thinking not just about decoding, which is often trying to look at print sound connections and trying to decode and sort of sound out the words. But we may need to visualize meaning in different, more graphical ways. And so a good part of reading, the view of reading in the 21st century, may need to also include visual representational acuity. So that's something that hasn't been really discussed. Right now, literacy scholars are focusing on the fact that listening comprehension isn't really emphasized as much as it should be in schools. It's really been focusing on decoding a lot. So we need to focus on both of these and possibly more visuographical understandings as well. So, okay, then, Deanna, what are you trying to tell us then? That's what I'm thinking you're thinking, Well, if the readability stats don't work and the Lexile are, what are we supposed to do? Well, what's great is that children can develop, and we can all develop, an internal toolkit within ourselves. And I love, and I still love, the 5-finger rule. Take the first book of a book that you think you would love. Maybe the picture, the title, the topic, you just love it. Take the first page. If there's more than 5 words that are unfamiliar to you, it's likely too difficult. So then you're teaching the child to be able to interact with the textual world without worrying about looking only for the orange books. They can actually expand themselves. They can go to bookstores where, bookstores, they love to cluster according to genre and topic, not necessarily by lexile level, although I know that some are adhering to that. So there's ways to do it. There's also types of books that have more of what we call the personability principle. So using the first first pronoun language, like we, I, us, that kind of personability language. It's almost as if the author is having a conversation with the reader. That is really engaging to the reader, and it actually helps keep attention on and can help engage the child in the book. Also, as I've said before, narrative. Children know narratives. Oh, they're constantly refining their narratives, and the stories continue to deepen with complexity. And so that's why, short novels and novellas and story books, a lot of pattern books that have stories in them, they're so wonderful to use. There are other sources available out there. This one, Social Justice Press. Social is Mayan for flower. And my good friend and colleague, Nicola McClung, who's an associate professor at University of San Francisco, developed this publication organization, it's nonprofit, and children get to publish their own books. And then also authors who want to engage in non-traditional, who often marginalized topics and issues, non-traditional family structures. They also publish those books as well. This one article actually featured a young author who was talking about how she gets around in her city of San Francisco, and she got to write about it. And as a result of writing that book, not only is she a published author, but she helps other readers learn how to read from her directly. It's a beautiful, beautiful program. Another amazing program, this was developed by a neuroscientist and scholar from UC Berkeley, Bob Knight, had no ties to education. In fact, many of my colleagues don't even know it exists, but Frontiers for Young Minds has been around for several years, almost a decade, I think, at this point. And it's scientists who have published in studies professionally are invited to adapt those studies, those original publications, especially for recent discoveries, and they can submit it to Frontiers for Young Minds and get it reviewed by young reviewers. And we held a live review session a year before last with the members of Girls Inc. Of Greater Santa Barbara. And we hosted it right here on the campus. And Professor Emily Jacobs was one of the people going up for review. And she said it was one of the most nervous. She was so anxious, but what a rewarding experience for both her and the teens who reviewed her piece. It's a lovely publication, and there's so many interesting articles out there. And so children don't have to rely on textbooks that are antiquated. And Richard Feynman said that. In fact, I will quote Richard Feynman in saying he thinks that science textbooks were universally lousy. He said that in all caps. And so how can we develop such reading skills for our kids? Well, I gave you some hints. There's some good stuff out there. And there's ways in which a child can navigate the textual world to find a good place for them. What conversations, I want you to think about these questions. What conversations do you envision fostering among young readers? That's something that's worth a lot of thought, especially now with so much happening in our world. What you need to do is keep asking yourself, do I find this text interesting? Because oftentimes if I don't find it interesting, it's probably because it isn't interesting. then why would it be interesting for a young reader? Are there enough clues for unpacking challenging words or terms, or will I need to adapt this a little bit? And what learning opportunities do readers have? So is this a text that there's not really anything new to read from it, or can there be something new that a child can take with them and build a new understanding about the world? So in that that I mentioned with the National Assessment of Educational Progress, collaboration will be assessed. So collaboration is going to be important. Now, traditionally, classrooms were structured where the teacher was in the front of the room and students were in rows in desks, sort of, there was a lot of call and response kind of interactions. And that has changed over time. And you may have noticed that a lot of teachers that I know kind of foster collaborative groups, and they move around the room as children are trying to work on groups. I was actually a literacy coach back in Denver, where we were helping the district adopt collaborative strategic reading. And so that was, working on different strategies to unpack challenging academic texts. And I did a lot of text adaptation for that district as well. So this is a typical model in more recent times. However, with the pandemic, we've kind of come back, but maybe even a worse model of the traditional model, in the sense that children are often stuck in their boxes. They don't get a chance to interact with one another. They don't get a chance to speak because the teacher needs to be present in order to have a safe space for learning. And this is really unfortunate. And I want to share that universities can be a good resource for schools. And that's what we're doing with Harding Elementary, so that children can work more collaboratively in online spaces, but also have facilitation support from our pre-service teachers that are getting training here. I've got undergraduates and graduate students that have expertise in teaching. So there's a lot of expertise that can help break down this unfortunate setting, because this is a recipe for not supporting an important aspect of schooling, which is socio-emotional learning. We have to learn how to talk to one another and engage and interact and collaborate. And so this I hope we can help our schools become more interactive. And here's the situation. Our kids need us to listen more. The average blogger is 13. Okay, so they're out there and they're wanting their voices to be heard. They can see the pandemic. They live in it. They see all of the immigration issues that we've had to experience in this state and all around the country, and the fires and all of the issues that have come down from climate change. They're part of this world, and they can see it. And the strife, the political divide that we're experiencing, what one reporter, what some are calling a cold civil war, they're feeling the tensions, and they're seeing the socio-political revolution that is happening before our eyes. So could reading be an escape? I'm not a proponent of escaping. There's no escaping of the reality, and the children don't want to. They want to be a part of the solution. And so always tell the truth, but with the language of understanding, love and understanding. And I put love first, then understanding, because it's with great care and good listening that we can truly understand and start to heal our world. So how do we do that? How do we teach such multimodal reading, critical reading practices with such strife that's happening, knowing we can't ignore it? Well, we are a community, and this is community-based literacies. These are the fundamental principles that we learn from one another. that we listen to one another, that we work together, we help each other, we give each other space to think, we give each other a chance to share, and we respect each other. This is in every single room of my clinic space, of our clinic space. And it's one thing that I talk about first and foremost with anyone receiving any training at the community-based literacies. Going from these principles, we can make anything happen. And it's just engaging with love and understanding with our community. So when we're engaging in real data, for example, data representations, inciting questions like, what do you see? What do you think is important? What do you think is interesting? These questions help engage the child to grapple with, not dig out right answers, but to grapple with textual materials. What's confusing? What clues can help us understand? These are the approaches I use in supporting young readers. What have we learned so far? Does everyone agree? What is missing? Are there biases here? Is this fair? Are what we're seeing is fair? Those are some of the questions that we ask, and then moving towards actions. What can we do about it? Who could we write to? What could we create? These are important things that we want to address with children. And what questions or advice do you have for the author? Because the text is no longer the authority anymore. It's the interaction that brings about better truths and better answers and better solutions. So reading development is a lifelong journey, and all of us are becoming more literate every day with our world. So we are constantly engaging in our world, and I am constantly developing my own reading and language skills, as are you. And the more children see this as a lifelong journey, the more they can start to embrace reading for what it is. It's a tool, it's a part of ourselves, and it's something to be cherished and celebrated. So here I'm going to leave with an example of what it means to engage in multimodal critical reading with a real, authentic purpose. So taking this New York Times article, this would be too difficult to read with, let's say, third graders. But I can look at the data representations, and I could share a little bit about, well, what do we see? We see some red parts, we see some blue parts. Let's kind of look at those. And we look at the legend, and we see that the red parts relate to hotter temperatures and the blue cooler temperatures. And children, color differentiation is one of the first things that is part of the developmental path of learning. And we can zero in on some of these cooler parts of the section and say, well, what could that be like? Why are some parts cooler and some parts warmer? Have the children kind of wonder about that? Maybe it has to do with, maybe those are the houses with less air conditioning, and so it's hotter. Actually, it's the opposite, right? The air conditioning blows out hot air. But anyway, you can also share actual photos. Here's a picture of a space within the red areas. Here's maybe what a picture looks from one of the blue areas. What do you see that's different? Well, there's children in one part. Okay, what else do you see? Well, there's more trees in the other picture. And so through the negotiation and the brainstorming, children start to come to the realization, and more science is being discussed about the impact our nature has on maintaining average temperatures in a particular area. And so that might lead to action, maybe creating a community garden. That is a good example of how looking at inequities, looking at issues related to social justice can lead to creativity, and one that has been known and cited to help a sense of well-being, especially for marginalized populations. The more that we act, the better we feel and the more human we feel. And so that's something that I think that we can do more of, especially now that we're in online spaces. Other community-based projects to consider: neighborhood libraries. There's some beautiful, I have a running path. There's some beautiful boxes that people have put up and have little glass windows, and they put little books that you can take and maybe share other books. You could have that all throughout a neighborhood. You could have a spot where that's where all the children's books are. That would be outstanding. You can create messages of unity and support. I saw little painted rocks of vote. You know, you, regardless of your political affiliation, you can support one another in voting their voice. Community newsletters. I know of some schools that are engaging in community newsletters within their school, that children are becoming reporters. Neighborhood school cookbooks, and other forms of civic activism. This is about us and what we can do in our community to engage our young developing readers. So that's a little bit of what I had to share this evening. I'm Blue. I may have not answered a lot of what your questions were, what brought you here, and I'm happy to answer more. The two links that I have, the first link is the Community Based Literacies website. It's available, it actually is available in both Spanish and English. You can see our resources, you can see our programs, you can see who we are. I'm just one member, and we're non-hierarchical in that all the voices in that community matter. And then the other link is for within the Gevirtz Graduate School of Education. It's in case you are interested in getting services for, if you know of a child that could use some support and some interaction support. We are up and running virtually, so we'll be happy to engage. There's an intake survey link on that site. You would just go to the Gevirtz Graduate School website and you'll see where the clinics are and where the McEnroe Reading and Language Arts Clinic. And so that's all I have to share.
Dr. Arya, thank you so much. I think that that was just a fantastic talk, so I really appreciate it. We do have question and answers already rolling in. We don't have a lot of time for question and answer, so if you are eager, I know that I have 3 right now. If you have a couple more, please get those to me quickly, because we will try to keep this short and sweet. Okay. So Leonard is from Indonesia, and he said, I realized that this kind of learning method would make for their lesson and it becomes more meaningful. His question is, how do you build their awareness about the importance of reading in the middle of this hard situation?
I think we do it with them. So obviously the only way that we can do this to engage in any kind of conversation with youth, unless you're living in the same household, is to be online. And I would give a tour of maybe thinking of those pieces of information that we need as readers, right? We want to know what's happening in the world. We want to know what people are doing to protect our earth. And so looking at articles, one hook I use is, usually it's a way I hook them. I might have I have an article about seals and declining numbers of seals, and that leads to other ocean activities. So we have a repository of little texts like that produce more knowledge about our world. So that's one way I would connect, in that without reading, we wouldn't know about that. I mean, there are plenty of video documentaries, and so that's also important. But showing the decline, it's hard to show decline of populations without data representations. So that is a real important message. You could maybe start there. But also allowing a child to just enjoy reading. It took I had one 6th grader, he just refused. He just hated it. And it took time and it took availability. They had to have access to books. Eventually, he started to pick one up and realized that I wasn't pressuring him to doing anything and that he had choice. So, really thinking about choice, as I mentioned earlier, and space for exploration. I think those will be important. I don't know if I answered that question, but I.
Thank you. So Tessa says, how do reading scholars explain readers of all ages and abilities tackling the 7-book Harry Potter series, which demands a high level of reading and language skills?
Well, I read the Harry Potter book with my 6th graders, and they had a huge range of abilities. And so, what I did is I made sure there were multiple entry points to engaging in that. So, some were listening and drawing according to what they were hearing. So, they were practicing their listening comprehension. Others were reading along and tracking text as I was reading. Tracking text as I'm reading sophisticated text, because there are a lot of words in there. There are a couple words I don't know because I'm not British. There were some Britishisms in there. And so we would in modeling that show it really relieves the students that I can't read every single word because I'm an adult. And tracking the text as they're reading helps build automaticity of a lot of the high frequency words that we would want them to learn. So it's allowing for different engagement into the reading experience, and also providing a tool for which one could track. In again, you have to have access to these texts as well. So I had a class set, which is hard to come by. But now through Zoom, because that's what we're limited to, there could be scanned texts. I don't know what else.
Thank you. Yeah. So Allison asks, how are you dealing with number 1, dyslexia, and number 2, kids without a computer or quiet place to work, and maybe offering some suggestions?
So one of the things that would be important to read in that special issue is they tackle dyslexia. In the title of that, I'm not going to get the title quite right, but it's something about the need for a scientific definition, or the need for dyslexia to be more scientific. The problem is there in this review of all the research, there are 4 different definitions of what dyslexia means. And I go out in the public and I hear a different take on what dyslexia means. The transposition of letters, there's a lack of automaticity of reading. There's too much variability to be really clear about that term. And there's clearly a gray area between someone who just needs more practice in reading versus someone who might have a problem, let's say, segmenting the different sounds. So some folks, it's the phonological awareness, and for some, it's putting that sound onto print. So the first part is good assessments, and that's what we have here at the clinic. And so what we do is we do an in-depth assessment to see where exactly is the struggle, and then with that, we are able to address that particular part. We would do a lot of sound games to help the child discern more of the different sounds of the system. We use a lot of games and interactivities, and we, drum roll, are creating a virtual reality program to foster decoding skills that and story writing. So this is really focused on reading and writing skills, and so we're building that program as we speak. But that is the future, and so I'm keeping my gaze out there. So that is using full kinesthetic immersion, right? So we know that kinesthetic activities like drawing letters in the sand or with lentils or manipulating blocks, those actually help because they bring more information. So we do a lot of manipulatives, a lot of activities, a lot of games. We tried to make it more game-like so that's more engaging. And the children keep coming back to our clinic. So we're doing something right.
Great. Thank you so much. So let's see, we've got one more. So Tessa said that she was actually talking about readers choosing to read all of the Harry Potter books on their own, regardless of their abilities. So more about them really choosing, I guess, Harry Potter.
Why not? I mean, when I was 7, my mom was a nurse and she had subscription to the Journal of American Medicine. I loved those journals. I would look at all the pictures all day long. I couldn't read the words, but I loved them. And my mom interacted with me, sometimes when she was there. But if not, I would just look at them. Did it ruin me? I'm not sure. I don't think so. I think it's fine. The exploration is fine. If they want to, if they enjoy it, um, that's okay. As long as we also have opportunity for in helping them develop their reading skills so that they can read every word. So there's a way of reading. We grow into our ways of reading. I grow in my reading comprehension every day. I still do. That is the big myth we have, is somehow after high school we have all the reading skills we need, but we're constantly engaged in that. So I don't know. I don't personally have a problem with anyone trying to read something that might seem a little bit beyond their reading ability.
So we'll have this be the last one. She has a little bit more clarification, and if not, maybe you guys can have an offline conversation. But her question is she said about the reader's self-discipline in improving their reading abilities.
Self-discipline. The most self-discipline I've seen when a child develops that self-discipline, it's usually because they're incredibly motivated, engaged, and inspired. And they have a clear goal of what they want to do and what they want to be. And unfortunately, our children often don't have that opportunity to think about what they really want to do with their reading. What are the different ways in which we read? Why do we read? A lot of that isn't really talked about. Oftentimes, reading can often feel like you read a textbook and you answer questions or you fill out a worksheet. And so talking about reading and why we read is so important. So I'll be happy. They could send me an email message and you can yell at me there.
Continue the conversation, for sure. Thank you very, very much, Dr. Arya. This has been a wonderful presentation. Next month, on November 9th, we have author Anne Vicelisis and the curator of malacology at the Santa Barbara Museum of Natural History, Daniel Geiger. They're going to be presenting on abalone and some of the history and culture around abalone use in Southern California. So that's going to be a fantastic presentation on Monday, November 9th. So we'll see you all in a month. Until then, we have this really cool event. So if anyone is looking for a safe way for their kiddos to enjoy Halloween, we are doing Mysteries at the Museum. And you can purchase a clue kit and come and visit us October 23rd to the 25th and October 30th through November 1st. And they can become detectives and dress up in costume and have a safe social distance way to experience some of the Halloween festivities. So I hope everyone stays safe and takes care, and hopefully we will see you around the museum. Our halls are opening up indoors. Our gallery halls are opening October 15th, so later this week. Again, safely. We would love to see you back around the museum. Thank you so much for your support. You can always continue your donations or underwrite and support free public programs like this one in Science Pub. So thank you so much, Dr. Arya. Take care. And her identification was there. So if you want to reach out with more questions, I do see some question and answers popping up. So you may get a couple of emails, Dr. Arya.
That's fine. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Have a good evening. Bye, all.